Oops. That should be me. Okay, are we back? We might be back. We're back, we're so back. Probably back. um, hmm. One moment. Just checking on these issues here, because it is a significant issue to be using your software to encode things instead of your hardware. That's not ideal. It's going to cause a lot of frame stutters that I do not want. You know, I checked my mic. It's been a couple of weeks. I did a once over on my microphones, made sure all of my filters were on, that the right microphone was picking up my voice. Sometimes, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the wrong microphone gets picked up, and that's not ideal. So, I made sure that everything was picking up properly. What I did not check was my hardware encoding. Because why would I, right? You put something on OBS and you expect it to just stay the same. It did not stay the same. So, it looks like we're back, we're good. Hey there, hi there, Hyde again, and we're going to play this game, whether the game wants me to or not. Yeah, you just gotta roll with the punches sometimes, right? Let me just put this back up. There we go. Let's get back into the game. I am not dropping frames, I am recording. Checklist done. Yeah, it's been a while. I'm a little out of practice. My mind's not exactly on it today. I apologize, like I had no way of knowing. This has happened before, actually, with OBS, right? A while ago, I had the exact same problem, and it ruined an entire batch of my recordings. I was just overloading my encoders, right, with my presets. Now, we're not having that problem. There won't be any stuttering that isn't internet related, which is good, yeah? I have enough stuttering as it is. When that ruined my batch of recordings, I was very upset. I still have some of those to this day in my backlog, which is slowly getting smaller because I am putting content from my backlog out there very slowly. I haven't recorded anything new yet since the last time I talked about it. It feels like it's been weeks since I've actually opened up OBS, sat down, recorded or streamed anything. And it has been. It really has been. I don't mind that, but I'm gonna have to get to it. I've been working on, as much as possible, scripting for the new series that I want to put out. It's going to be small video essay type things. Starring id. Yeah, it's going to be id content. And id really was never supposed to be playing video games. I just thought it was funny that I played a lot of games with religious symbolism, and I thought that would be appropriate for a cult leader, but it was never the intention. So we're gonna get back to how I intended to use id. Yeah, we're gonna get back to that. I have 3 different video ideas. I have the initial start of a script. I'm actually learning a lot about something that I wanted to talk about, so there is a bit of research being done. The first episode is partially scripted. I have the bare bones summary of what I want to do, and I don't know when that's going to come out. Whenever I feel like recording and finalizing the script first and foremost, I'll get to it, yeah, as soon as I can. But in the meantime, I have a couple more videos that I can put out from my backlog. The bees one, no one's actually seen the short that I put out. I guess it was this morning. Um, that came from my backlog probably months and months ago. Yeah, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, maybe 5, maybe half a year. I've been looking at a lot of my old content as of late, just seeing how I've evolved as a streamer, how my personas have evolved as unique characters, right? Like I noticed about 6 months ago, I drastically changed how Jekyll sounds. I made Jekyll's voice a lot more high-pitched, and I gave him a happier kind of tonality to things, right? Yeah, whenever I do Jekyll now, I'm usually doing it with a smile, right? I don't know if that's because I like the Joker as a character, but I feel like doing it with a smile gives it that kind of manic energy. Yeah, and I like that manic energy. So, that was about 6 months ago that I realized, although there are earlier videos where I did that, and then there are later videos where I didn't. So it's very strange. I still haven't finalized even Jekyll. But in a sense, I haven't finalized Hyde either, you know? Hyde's still very much me, but at the same time, I'm still working on my voice. I'm still working on my vocal delivery. As a VTuber, that was one of my big goals, right? To work on my voice, to work on my vocal delivery, to, I don't know, be able to communicate better, to express myself more clearly. Probably not more concisely. It's never been anything I've been good at, expressing myself concisely. No. I ramble and I rant and I go on weird tangents. My mind just can't focus. And it really never could, but there was a period in my life where I could think more clearly and I could actually talk coherently. Nowadays, I don't know. Like, I keep thinking maybe it's age. Maybe I'm just getting older and I can't think as clearly as I could back then. But maybe it's I'm slowly slipping into a madness of my own design. Yeah. In which case, that's fine too. I don't really mind. What was I talking about? Oh, right, right. I know content's been pretty light as of late. Light as of late. That's a fun one to say. Light as of late, light as of late, light as of late. I meant to stream Centum this week. I didn't. I was dealing with the aftermath of the reason I couldn't stream on Sunday. Big power outage. Basically had to get rid of all of my groceries in my fridge, which was fun. A bunch of spoiled dairy. And eggs, of course, eggs. That was the really big bit, right? I got a bunch of eggs. I just got eggs recently. And I hadn't been using them. I used like 2 for a cake. And the rest, at $1 per egg, were wasted. Had to be thrown out because I couldn't trust them, right? If your fridge goes, you can't trust them. I know back in the old days, right? Back in the old days, you could put eggs out on the counter, or you could leave them in the chicken coop, and they'd be fine for weeks. But, we can't do that with modern eggs. See, when... Do I really have to talk about how chickens lay eggs? Yeah, I do. So the neat thing about a chicken is, much like a reptile, or probably a dinosaur, they have these anatomical structures called cloaca. And cloaca are kind of like an all-in-one waste excretion port, yeah, on the bottom of the bird or reptile. In addition to excreting things, waste products, that's also where the eggs come out of. So it really is all-purpose, which is fantastic. Great design. So we usually clean eggs when we put them to market here in the USA. For better or worse, that gets rid of all the waste products that might come along with the egg. But it also strips the egg of a protective layer, which allows more air to get in, and basically makes it less shelf stable. So yeah, that's a problem. You can't just leave eggs out on the counter. If you get them in a modern supermarket like the USA, they're going to be cleaned. That's so we can avoid illnesses and other kind of contagions, as well as just waste products. You don't want those in eggs, right? Like, imagine that, going to a store and getting unwashed eggs covered in, covered in fecal matter and, urine, which is all mixed into a slurry. As you know with birds, their waste materials are very watery for exactly that reason. So if you go to a store and you find unwashed eggs, you'd have to wash those every single time you'd want to use one, right? And that means you're not going to be making like cookie dough and licking the spoon afterwards. You're going to make sure that everything is cooked to an appropriate temperature, and you're going to make sure that the eggs are clean. You don't want to do that every single time, right? I wouldn't want to do that. So the convenience is really the trade-off for shelf stability. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, I'm kind of happy that I don't have to wash every single egg I ever break into a bowl. Yeah. So we're going to get into the actual topics of today. This one's going to be... I don't know if it's going to be fun. We have a couple, right? First and foremost, I want to talk about a new tobacco I bought. I was feeling a little bit adventurous, I guess a couple of weeks ago. I say it's a new tobacco. I'm not going to lie to you, most of these notes were written for last week. So I don't even remember what I wrote. But we're going to be talking about tobacco, I guess. And the new tobacco is bourbon whiskey, right? It's made by the same manufacturing group as my usual favorite pipe tobacco. I'm a big fan of pipe tobaccos with, I don't want to say strong room notes, but pleasant room notes, right? I really like vanillas, I like raisiny notes. If you don't know what a room note is, imagine walking into a smoker's lounge, right? I don't know if you've ever... Like, maybe some of you aren't old enough to know what a smoker's lounge is. Imagine walking past someone who's smoking an entire pack of cigarettes at once. Yeah. And you know how you get that kind of weird acrid smell from the cigarette smoke? Oops. That would be the room note of a cigarette. It's usually described as unpleasant. And I agree. I don't really like the smell of cigarette tobacco. It's cut differently, it's blanched in different chemicals. And it's not really processed the same way as pipe tobacco, or cigars for that matter. It's usually just cut up and covered in chemicals. Yeah. So the room notes on cigarettes just usually not great. Maybe you would consider a menthol cigarette to have a mentholy room note. I don't know. I think they smell gross. But with pipe tobacco and pipe tobacco especially, but also cigars, the smell of the smoke left behind in a room is exactly what a room note is. And a lot of pipe tobacco is typically Cavendish. Cavendish is a process more than a variety of tobacco, right? Like, a lot of people don't know this. Cavendish refers to the process of curing the tobacco, right? So the interesting thing about Cavendish tobaccos is that they're cured, they're dried under pressure. They're dried and kept humid, actually. It's just like a maturation or fermentation process, right? You don't eat unfermented chocolate. Chocolate has a slight fermentation process. You don't really eat unfermented bread, right? There needs to be a process for the chemicals to react. And in the case of it being under pressure, what that does is it increases the sugar that comes out of the pores, and it kind of condenses it until the tobacco itself becomes sticky and kind of moist. And that gives it a very pleasant smoke, right? Like, it makes it a very tarry smoke. Like, when you're burning something, it's great to burn dry leaves. You'll get a very dry smoke. But when you're burning tobaccos, You don't really want that dry smoke because it burns way too quickly, way too hot. You want a kind of mellow smoke, and that's what the process is there to do. It mellows out the smoking process. And in the meantime, it also gives it a wonderful room note. Very sugary, very sweet. Unlike vapes that are artificially sweet. Like, I know a lot of people who enjoy vaping, and it's never been for me. I get it. You don't want smoke in your lungs. I don't want glycerin in my lungs. I don't want glycerol. I don't want glycol. I don't want any of those things in my lungs. Um, I'd rather just have the tobacco smoke. It's probably no better. Probably a little worse, in fact. But at the same time, I don't know. Humans have evolved with tobacco for thousands of years. And vaping, that's a lot more recent. I don't know if the human body adapts that quickly. I don't know if it's even adapted to smoking tobacco, but I'm sure it probably has a little in certain populations. Like, I've always wondered if in native tribes in the Americas where tobacco really comes from, whether those populations of people have a stronger tolerance to nicotine, for example, just innately, or a stronger, I don't know, immune response to the damage caused by tobacco. Because they've lived with tobacco for thousands of years, and they've used it ceremoniously for religious rites and purification rituals and other things. There might be some kind of, I don't know, selective process, like natural selective process, or I guess you could say human selective process, for people who can, I guess, mitigate the damages of tobacco more than others, yeah. I always wondered about that. I don't know if it's true. I think it's plausible, and I'd like to see some studies done on it. I don't know if there are any. I haven't looked into it. That's just one of my thoughts, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people out there have these wonderful thoughts in their heads, and they just never do anything with them, right? Like, you might be curious about something, but not curious enough to actually sit down, go through Google Scholar, type in whatever you want to know, and see what the research is, right? That's usually where my roadblock is. I'll have an idea and think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's true. But I just never do anything more with it. And that's fine. Um, so, the new tobacco was from the same manufacturing group as my usual Cavendish pipe tobaccos. I thought it was a safe choice, right? I like what they do with their other brands. It very much is like one group with multiple brands. It's funny how they do that. A lot of companies do that, right? Like, they'll own a brand. One big conglomerate owns Pepsi and Kraft and all these other common products that you find. But it's really one group. These mega corporations that just own everything and use different brands to make you seem like you're buying a different product when you're not. Um, I was very disappointed with the new tobacco, right? It didn't taste like bourbon. You know, when you think of bourbon, you think of ethanol. You think of maybe vanilla notes. You think of tannins. You think of oakiness. You think of smoke, maybe. Uh, you think of all these nice, wonderful flavors. And I really didn't get that in the tobacco. Like, even if a tobacco has a nice room note, it doesn't necessarily have a nice taste. I get that, right? I didn't get any kind of taste from this tobacco. It just tasted like very cheap tobacco. It didn't even taste like whiskey, right? You know how there's a difference between whiskey and bourbon. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't know there's a difference between whiskey and bourbon. Bourbon's always tasted a little bit more, I don't know, savory, smoky a little bit. Uh, like, some people say it tastes a bit like, I don't know, peanuts. I don't get that with bourbons, but my taste buds are weird anyway. The smell, the room note, was just tobacco. It was dry leaves and mustiness, a little bit of leather, right? But not bourbon. The smell of the tobacco before I was smoking it was vaguely like bourbon. And I don't know if you've ever smelled bourbon that's been on, like, a bar floor. Like, someone spills their drink on the floor of a bar, and there's sawdust on the ground. That's what it smelled like, a little bit. Just, like, faintly of bourbon, and mostly of plant material. It was like the tobacco was cured adjacent to a distillery. Not quite flavored, but the ghost of a flavor of bourbon. Like, at what point is something actually flavored with something else? Is a similar smell sufficient? I think that's pretty much what they were going for here. That the smell was similar to bourbon. Or does it need to taste like it, right? I don't think it needs to taste like it in order to be bourbon flavored. Um, but that's what vapes are very strong in, right? That vapes actually kind of taste what they're supposed to taste like. But in the world of tobacco, there are a lot of different tobaccos out there. Tobacco always just kind of tastes like tobacco. So really what you're looking for is the smell to be close enough. The smell is really the carrying point there. I don't know. You would think with bourbon, it would be the perfect pairing with tobacco. Like, in fancy magazines in the 1990s, you would always see something like, oh, pair your cigar with such and such bourbon. Or in movies, rich people would be smoking bourbon, or yeah, smoking cigars while drinking a glass of bourbon. You would expect that combination to work well. And if you get a smoky bourbon, that would work even better, right? Like the natural smokiness in a bourbon ought to pair very well with tobacco. Now, in this case, it failed miserably. um, I really don't know. The only bourbon-like trait that I actually got out of this new tobacco was that it left me with a sore throat the next day and a congested nose. Like, that's very common when I drink bourbon. I will end up feeling like my face is swollen. I think it probably is, in fact. Just a matter of dehydration and histamine responses. Um, so yeah, it was very disappointing. It left me with a sore throat for days. And that was very bourbon-like. I don't think I'll buy it again, but I'm glad I tried it, you know? Like, I do enjoy trying new things from time to time. Whenever I get the opportunity, I do enjoy the novelty of it. And I don't regret buying it, because now I know. Now I know never to buy it ever again, you know? Just ignore it. There's another company that does bourbon, I guess, flavored. That seems wrong. Bourbon flavored cigars. And I kind of like their stuff a bit more. Their tobacco is much nicer. It doesn't just have a musty vegetal kind of smell to it. It actually smells like tobacco. Very smoky, very, very leathery. And I think that pairs better with bourbon flavoring than, I guess, the Virginia Burley, maybe? I don't know what it is. The Virginia tobacco of whatever variety that I got in my little pouch of new tobacco. Yeah. Since then, I've been smoking the regular stuff, and it's much nicer, you know? The regular stuff has vanilla notes and raisin notes, and it's usually what gets compared to what people would call a grandpa smell. I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it again. A lot of people come up to me when I'm smoking a pipe outdoors when I have to socialize, and they'll tell me, oh, that smells just like my grandpa. That's wonderful. And, you know, they get this bright, shiny look on their face, like they're remembering something nostalgic. And that's a magical moment for them. But at the same time, it's like, I know I'm old. You don't have to rub it in my face. I know I'm an old man. That's fine. Yeah. I don't know. I just enjoy it, you know? I enjoy watching the smoke rise. I enjoy the room notes. And, when I have facial hair, those smells get trapped in my facial hair. right? So that I smell them for the rest of the day. Is that weird to admit? I don't know. But, like, if I have a mustache, for example, and I smoke my pipe tobacco, and the smoke drifts through my mustache, it doesn't just save soups. It saves odors, too, right? So my mustache will smell like vanilla and raisins for the rest of the day. I think that's nice, you know? I think that's wonderful. I wonder how other people might feel about that. But I think it's good. Yeah, I think it's good. um, Next topic. A lot of people in my life have been having birthdays around now, or they did have them. I won't say the specifics, obviously. And as unsocial as I am, usually for birthdays, I do actually try to do something, right? Like, I don't care about my own birthday. I never have. I'm one of those people that's kind of curmudgeonly around holidays in general, and my birthday doesn't even seem like a real holiday to me. But for other people, I understand. They're humans, and they actually like celebrating things. Understandable. I get it. Personally, I don't want it. I appreciate any gestures on my birthday, but I don't want it personally. I will try to meet people halfway, though. As I was talking about earlier this stream, um, I did bake a cake recently, which is typically what I do for birthdays. I bake cakes by hand, and I do mean everything by hand. A lot of people, they'll use an electric mixer, a stand mixer, a KitchenAid, whatever they have. Maybe a food processor, who knows? Whatever seems fun to them. But I do everything by hand. I feel like the texture is different when using a hand mixer, an electric mixer, or any of those other modern appliances, right? Like, one of the first steps you do for most cakes is you cream the fats and the sugars. That's common in a lot of baking. Most recipes do that. You basically smush all of the fats into the sugar until it's light and fluffy. Yeah. Um, a hand mixer will do that a lot easier, right? You'll get something a lot more uniform, homogeneous, and probably lighter and fluffier when you cream the sugar and the fats together. But is that a good thing? Maybe it makes a cake less dense, right? Think about the chemistry of cakes. I don't know if I really wanted to talk about cakes today, but we're going to talk about cakes today anyway. Think about the chemistry of cakes. When a cake is being baked, when you bake a cake, um, all of that air that you trap in while creaming the sugar and the fat, or yeah, the sugar and the fats together, is going to leave little air pockets in the crumb of the cake. The crumb is the structure, right? The internal structure between the grains of flour that get soaked in these liquids and expand into starches. So it creates all these uniform tiny little pockets, which is nice for cakes, right? It leaves them nice and fluffy. But what if you want to make a dense cake, right? Like, there are a lot of dense cakes out there. A lot of dense chocolate cakes exist. A lot of carrot cake's a famous example of a dense cake. I know a lot of people make very fluffy carrot cakes. I've never been a big fan of fluffy carrot cakes. I always liked the denser ones. And there are other techniques that you can use to make a denser cake. It doesn't just have to be limiting the amount of air that you incorporate during mixing, but in a lot of early cakes especially, you'll find very dense cakes were the norm because they didn't have these electronic appliances to really cream that sugar and fat together. So I feel like it's really only modern leavening agents and techniques, things like baking powder or baking soda, that have allowed cakes to get so fluffy and light in the first place, right? Back in the old days, when you wanted to make a cake, you'd make something like a pound cake. A pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, and a pound of butter. Or something like that. It's called that way for a reason, right? All the ingredients are roughly a pound. And, yeah, basically all of the air that you would put into a pound cake would be beaten into it manually by hand. So they wouldn't get very fluffy, they would be very dense things. Nowadays, pound cakes are a little bit closer to an angel food cake, I would say, right? Like, if you go to a store and you buy a pound cake, usually you're gonna get, like, a shortcake kind of thing, where it's not really leavened with anything else, but because of all of the air they can beat into it using dough conditioners, um, dough conditioners being basically extra chemicals. Not bad, not bad. They all have purposes, but dough conditioners and modern appliances, you can really get some light and fluffy pound cakes these days. Yeah. um, but in the old days, we didn't really have baking powder or soda. I think baking soda came around in, what, the late Victorian era or so? I'm not too sure. But I know before that, uh, we would use things like lye and wood ash, which, okay, I'm gonna get a little into the chemistry here. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate, right? And lye and wood ash, well, wood ash is usually a mixture of potassium and sodium carbonates. So, it's not quite as leavening as just sodium bicarbonate, but, it works in a pinch. It's just, it's not very food safe or food grade these days. Like, no one's using lye and... Okay, I take that back. Lye is a very common food ingredient, right? Lye is very common in things like pretzels. It's the only way to get that skin on a pretzel is in order to bake it after boiling it in a lye solution. Lye mixed with water. Kind of dangerous, in fact. I do kind of miss the days of plaster and bone dust being being adulterants in breads, right? Like, that's the Victorian era. Victorian England was a hell of a place, and being Edward Hyde and sometimes Dr. Jekyll, I remember the Victorian era very fondly, where everybody was adding plaster of Paris, gypsum, bone dust to their breads, whatever they could to cut costs. That's essentially what it was, to cut costs on the amount of flour they were using. They would adulterate their bread. And here's another fun fact. Victorians really enjoyed white bread, so they wanted their breads to be very white, whether it was wheat or not. So they would often bleach it. Like, they would bleach the hell out of it to make sure that it was stripped of anything nutritious. Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting, right? That's just one of those weird things that used to happen. Nowadays, we're not adding anything strange to our foods at all. No, absolutely not. Do you imagine doing that? Like adding artificial food colorings? We don't do that, no. Um, oh right, I mentioned it earlier. I wanted to do a Centum stream this week, and that's how we got on this topic, isn't it? Um, but I had to deal with the aftermath of the power outage, yeah. So that was unfortunate that I didn't get around to doing it. I didn't get the time, and I really didn't feel motivated after taking care of everything I had to do. I'm very interested in the story of Centum. It went in a weird direction, didn't it? An unexpected direction the last time we ended the stream. I'll admit, when I first saw the trailers for the game, I was very interested in the horror elements. Like, the trailer heavily featured the rat creature. And I thought, oh yeah, this is a game for me. Beautiful rat creature pixel art, horror style. But then, once we got to where we got at the last stream, I kind of lost a little bit of interest. Like, I think that was noticeable in my playthrough of it. I slowed down, the tone shifted a little bit. It went from horror to, I don't know, AI in the Age of Apocalypse. I don't know. But I'm invested, right? And that's usually one way to get me to play something I usually don't, is to get me invested. Make me play 3 hours of it. And maybe I want to see it through. Yeah. Like, I do want to see it through. I do want to see the ending. And I want to understand what's going on with that game. I know a lot of times I'm too quick to end a gaming series. Disco Elysium, Shadows over Loathing. A lot of them come to mind. I still haven't played more Legends Arceus, which we will talk about later, if I have time. uh, uh, yes, okay. But I realize that I'm too quick to end video series on my channel. And even the indie games, like the short little indie games that I play for my usual content, I give up way too soon. And then I get told that I missed something amazing. And the dev usually contacts me and says, actually, you're supposed to boot up the game again after it closes out on you. You missed most of the game, in fact. And I feel like an idiot for a day or two. And I don't want to do that again, right? Like, I'm invested in Centum. I've put 2.5 hours into it or so. And I don't want to miss anything amazing. I feel like Centum is one of those games that I have to admit this, right? I have to admit this. I haven't been excited for games in a long time. Like, I found games that do interest me. They align with my interest, but I haven't been excited to actually play them. And Centum is one of those games that, when I first saw the trailer, I thought to myself, yes, that's a game that I want to play. In fact, I want to play it so much that I'll play it as soon as possible. Day one release. And I intended to do that. I did. Unfortunately, Nintendo Switch games on the eShop do not unlock at midnight, or else I would have streamed it. The release date, right? I had to wait till the next day, when it actually unlocked. And I really want to give it a fair shake, right? I want to give it a fair shake because it actually excited me. And I liked what it was doing in the beginning. And I still kind of like what the story is doing. It's just bad timing, I guess. Bad timing that I had a power outage, I couldn't stream on Sunday, and I had to take care of all of the consequences of that power outage. So, that is going to be on the docket. Maybe this week sometime, I will boot it back up. And I will give it another, I don't know, 3 hours and see if we can get somewhere from there. Now, after that, I do want to talk about, like, I mentioned Legends Arceus, right? I mentioned Legends Arceus, and the Switch 2 Direct is going to be coming up pretty shortly. But since, I guess it was this week, they had a new Nintendo Direct, right? And it's pretty much the end of the Switch Nintendo Direct. All the big titles that you thought would just be there for the Switch. I remember thinking for the longest time, Legends, I guess it was Legends Zygarde, now it's Legends Z to A, which I hate. I hate that title. Pokemon Legends Z to A. I hate it. I hate it. But, yeah. Since then, there has been a new Nintendo Direct. Oh, we're hiccuping. That's okay. I'm recording this one. Since then, there has been a new Nintendo Direct, and we've seen actual gameplay footage of Legends Z to A. And I've got to say, I've been having a lot of thoughts about it, right? I really enjoyed Pokemon Legends Arceus. I thought it was a great game. I thought that was the direction that Nintendo, or not Nintendo, Game Freak ought to really take with Pokemon. I thought everything about it was just fresh and exciting. um, with Legends Z to A, what can I really say? I kind of like the look of the active combat system. Like the mechanics, some of the new mechanics look interesting. That you can actually dodge enemy attacks by moving your character. It's a little bit strange that you can't move the Pokemon directly. Like, I think that would be the natural evolution, to move the Pokemon directly in combat instead of just giving them vague kind of movement cues based on your own movement cues. But I guess that's kind of a little too in-depth, a little complicated. So maybe this is a good first step for that. I will give them their props for that. They're making combat more interesting. And I do think that Pokemon combat probably hasn't evolved all that much since the very earliest days on the Game Boy. Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red, and even Pokemon Yellow, up until now have pretty much been the same kind of combat things. They've added things here or there. You can Mega Evolve a Pokemon. You can use new items. You have held items. But really, the combat's just pick move, hit Pokemon, defend, whatever. Trap Pokemon. And there have been, like, metas for how you actually have to structure your team. With the ability to potentially dodge these moves, whether they be super effective or not, you can really open up Pokemon combat quite a bit. So I really like that. I really like that kind of active combat system. I want to see more of it. I think that's a good step. That said, I kinda hate the rest of the game design. Like, the entire design. From the very concept of it. It looks like all of it takes place in Lumio City. And I never played X or Y, so I don't know what Lumio City is. I don't care. It takes place in a city. I think that's insane. Sure, there are apparently these little Pokemon zones called Wild Zones. And to me, from the trailer, I'm sure it's not representative or all-inclusive, but from the trailer, it looks like these Pokemon exist in little parks in a city. I don't know how big those parks are going to be. They don't all look that big. Some of them look very tiny. And apparently you can find Pokemon on rooftops. That's one of the big things. You can go to a rooftop and fight Pokemon on the rooftop. I think that's incredibly stupid. I try to be positive here on this channel as much as possible. But I find that just so very incredibly stupid. Sure, Pokemon can live in cities. Lots of animals live in cities in the real world. There are things like pigeons and rats, right? Oh, no, we should reel this in and get rid of our fish. There are pigeons and rats that live in cities in the real world. And yeah, you can kind of, I guess, call that Pokemon behavior. But I really don't know how to feel about these semi-artificial little pockets of explorable space in a city. They feel so constrained, right? Like, with Legends Arceus, you could wander the maps, and you could go anywhere you wanted on the map so long as you didn't exceed the map's geography. I really like the fact that the geography itself contained the Pokemon in the regions. With Legends Z to A, which I hate saying. I'm gonna call it Legends Zygarde, because that sounds cooler. With Legends Zygarde, they've removed what I found most interesting about Legends Arceus. They removed the ecological element to the Pokemon series, right? Like, with Legends Arceus, certain Pokemon lived in certain environments, and that's true for life on Earth, in the real world, right? Certain life favors certain environments, and you would find these little isolated zones in these environments where certain life is habitable. A lot of people think a forest is consolidated, it's pretty just uniform. But that's not the case. You'll find things like aspen groves or fir groves, and then you'll find, beside that, like a patchwork, things like oaks and maples. And you'll find them kind of in these little pockets. They make these frameworks, these quilts of different terrains and different microbiomes, I guess. It makes sense, for example, for a cactus-type Pokemon to live in a desert. It doesn't make sense for a cactus-type Pokemon to live in a city. I don't care how you maneuver that, right? Like, oh, I made an artificial desert in the city. No, no, that's stupid. I hate it. You're ignoring all of the elements of the ecological needs of these Pokemon, right? Like, fish Pokemon live in seas, rivers, lakes, wherever else. And you would expect to see them in the waterways. You wouldn't expect to see them on a rooftop, in a bathtub or something. It just seems stupid. I hate it. I really liked going through those little micro habitats and seeing the Pokemon in their natural environments in Legends Arceus, right? And I want to see more of that kind of stuff in Pokemon. I want to see the Pokemon ecology, because that's what really interested me about the game series. Like, I'm pretty sure this entire series was created because the creator, I can't remember his name, used to collect beetles, right? And sure, you can collect beetles in cities, but sometimes you have to go into the wilds and actually see about where a certain type of beetle might live. Like, they only grow, or they only exist in certain groves of trees, or they only exist in high, tall grasses. And you'd have to understand their life cycles, you'd have to understand their ecology in order to actually collect them. Now you just go into a city and they're there. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Like, there are so many Pokemon professors in the series. You find one each game, right? Like, every single game has a different Pokemon professor, and they're all studying the same thing. They're all studying Pokemon. They're all studying the way Pokemon evolve. They're all studying the ecology of the Pokemon. How Pokemon behave and interact. Um, that's what the Pokedex is, right? It's the product of these professors' ecological research into the world of Pokemon as living, breathing creatures. It discusses Pokemon behaviors, interactions. Like, you'll see that, I think Pidgey used to eat Magikarp or something. Or, Drifloons would kidnap children. Like, yeah, you get some crazy things in there, but I actually want to see that kind of behavior, right? I think that's the most interesting part about Pokemon games. It makes the Pokemon feel like living, breathing creatures in a world that's alive and breathing. And in a city, I don't know how you do that, you know? I want the game to be ecological. I want to explore and discover when and how Pokemon actually interact with one another, how they feed, what they drink, how they behave with their own unique environments, and how that shaped their unique morphologies. I thought that was the greatest thing about um, the regional variants, right? I thought regional variants were a very clever addition to the series. I thought regional variants showed, unquestionably, how the unique morphologies of Pokemon adapted to the environments, right? I think that was one of the coolest parts of Legends Arceus, for sure. Seeing the ancestral forms of Pokemon that we would see in the future allowed us to glimpse how these things evolved over time and why they might have evolved the way they did. Uh, the clearest example might be Voltorb here, right? Voltorb was more of a plant-like thing in Legends Arceus, right? I'm pretty sure it was plant or... Yeah, it was plant type. Plant and electric. And it didn't really have the high electricity that you would think of in the modern Voltorbs, because it wasn't really very common back in the days of Legends Arceus. What was more common was the plants. And even Pokeballs, right? Yeah. It looked like older wooden Pokeballs in Legends Arceus. And then as Pokeballs evolved, so too did the Voltorbs that mimicked them. The Voltorbs eventually lost the plant-like attributes, that they gained more of an electrical attribute, that they became stronger with their electricity, because there was more electricity in their environment. And as the shape of the Pokeball, as the coloration of the Pokeball evolved over time to become the modern red and white version that you see, so too did the morphology of the Voltorb that is mimicking that Pokeball. They became smoother, rounder, more colorful, more electrical. And the ancestral forms kind of explained one of the mysteries from the very first games. Why do Voltorbs look like Pokeballs in Gen 1? Because they evolved too. They evolved in environments where Pokeballs were very common. They evolved basically because of human pressures, right? Over time, as humans changed what they could mimic in their environments, they adapted to it. And as humans created more, I guess, electrical devices, they evolved more in tune with the electrical devices. Because they were mimicking Pokeballs, they have to be close to humans in order to survive for some reason or another. I don't think that was ever explained. Maybe humans help them propagate. Or maybe humans give them protection when they mimic Pokeballs. Who knows? I don't. But over time, as the humans changed what they could mimic in their environments, the Voltorbs adapted. And this really speaks to the kinds of adaptation over time to blend in with their changing environments that I really like to see in evolutionary studies in general. That's evolution. That's natural selection. That's what truly interested me about Pokemon, the ecological aspects of it. And Legends Arceus was such a great vehicle for that kind of content, right? You're actually out there making the Pokedex. Like, you're drawing it yourself, you're writing it yourself. These are Pokemon that no one in Team Galactic actually know about for the most part, right? Like, maybe they've seen them, and that's about it. And you have to write your reports on them. And you give those to Commander Kamato, I think his name is. And you're really the first person to do that. I wanted that to be the next Pokemon game. I wanted that to be the next Legends game at the very least. And unfortunately, I just don't think that's what we're getting, right? I think the series has a lot of great vehicles for that kind of Pokemon ecology. I think Pokemon Snap is a great example, right? When Pokemon Snap first came out, you could see how Pokemon would interact with one another. You could see Meowth interacting with different Pokemon. You could see Eevee rolling around or whatever. You could see all of these unique interactions, these unique environments that would specifically hold these Pokemon. And it really gave a sense of wonder and adventure to the world. And it was up to your exploration as a player to actually take all the different branching pathways to discover more and more Pokemon behaviors and uncover the secrets of Pokemon ecology. When it comes to Legend Zygarde, I'm skeptical that you can do that, you know? I'm very skeptical that Legend Zygarde or Zeta A can actually do that. I'll tell you what I want. I'll tell you exactly what I want in a Pokemon game. I want a game like New Pokemon Snap, where there's a vast world of Pokemon. There's vast, varied environments, and I want you to take it off the rails. I want you to let us explore the three-dimensional space, like Legends Arceus. Make interactions time-dependent, so time of day, based on spawn chances, or spawn zones, because Pokemon would be found in different environments at different times. Show me that the world is alive and dependent on other creatures, right? That everything is connected. Show me the world in which Pokemon live. Don't just show me the Pokemon. I've seen that enough. Show me the world of Pokemon. That's what I want. Let me become the next Pokemon professor. Let me discover their behaviors and life conditions. Let me discover, I don't know, a Scizor molting against a tree as it levels up. Let me see a Teddiursa being protected against Combees for getting too close to the hive. Let me see tailless slowpokes roaming the wild because humans poached their delicious, delicious tails. And let me see humans eating their tails for a change. That hasn't been a thing since the first games, has it? The poaching of slowpoke tails. But I want to see that. Like, humans are a part of the environment too. humans must have affected other Pokemon behaviors and habitats, right? Just like they did with Voltorbs, and they did with Slowpokes. I don't care how many men reproduced with Pokemon cephalopods in history. Give me more actual ecology, though. Give me more human influences, like how human pollution led to the rise in mucks and grimers. What were the proto-mucks and grimers like, right? Like in the original Pokemon, Mew was supposed to be the source of all Pokemon. It could adapt and mimic anything, right? That was the big thing. So all Pokemon might have started as Mew. I don't know if that's true for the lore and canon nowadays, but if that's the case, then they were the initial Pokemon, and all other things adapted from the ancestral Mew. Nowadays, I don't know. Maybe it's different. I haven't played a lot of Pokemon recently, so who knows? But in the nature of the real world, every every morphological difference, every morphological trait or feature has a reason to it. Not like it was a predetermined reason, but there is a reason why things evolve the way they do in nature. So I want to know, why do Mr. Mimes look so eerily human? Why do Wishcash have resistance to electricity? I have so many questions, and Game Freak has provided so few answers. I don't care if you leave out the combat. Leave it to be a Pokemon Snap game in 3 dimensions, for all I care. Leave out the combat entirely. I don't care. Just let me actually learn about the world of Pokemon. That's something you haven't done yet. That's something new, that's something novel. Let me experience the breathing world in an entirely new way. That's all I want. You know what it feels like to me? When I see the new trailer for Legends Zygarde, Legends ZA? It feels like the designers didn't understand the appeal of the series. Let me give you a brief overview here. Adventure, fun, collecting living, breathing creatures, exploration and discovery. And you know what they decided? Let's just make Pokemon Go, but without your own environments. Just a generic city. Sure, okay. I'll be surprised. I really will be surprised if there isn't a sewer level. I would be highly surprised if you couldn't catch Grimers and Mucks in a sewer, or Pidgeys eating out of dumpsters, or Ratatatas eating out of landfills. I don't know, right? Like, those things have to exist there. But aside from that, I don't know. It just feels generic, soulless, like it's not an adventure. I, I judge games way too quickly. These are just my first impressions from the trailers, right? Maybe Lumio City is much larger than I thought it was. Maybe the Pokemon Wild Zones aren't as integrated as I would thought. Um, I just don't know. I haven't seen any evidence of that, and that's kind of what I wanted to see, right? Like, I really wanted to see more of Legends Arceus, where you could go to these different regions with their vast geographies and their different microbiomes, and you could actually see how Pokemon lived and breathed in the wild. I was just very disappointed, you know? I was very disappointed. I've been looking forward to Legends ZA since I knew it as Legends Zygarde. I feel like it was a missed opportunity, and that it's not capitalizing on anything that actually made the Legends Arceus game worth my attention, right? Like, maybe that's just a personal thing for me. Maybe I'm not the target audience anymore. I'm an old man. I get it. But if you want to capture older fans, consider making the content more appropriate for the age group. Consider making the content more ecological. Because as the fans have aged and adapted, so too must the games of Pokemon be relevant to us. Yeah. I'll get off my soapbox now. But I felt like I had to say that. because I was talking about being excited for games, and that's the dark side of being excited for a game, right? Being disappointed when the game is, you know, what it is, or what it seems to be. Aside from that, I've been watching a lot of horror video recaps as of late. Like, my time's been precious as of late. I've not been motivated to make much content, but my time has been precious. I've been working, and when I work, I watch movie recaps on YouTube because it's like a movie in 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And that saves me, I don't know, 80 minutes of time sometimes uh, on a movie that I probably wouldn't watch all the way through anyway. But I like hearing the stories. I like seeing horror films and seeing what's new in the horror genre. And it got me thinking about different little horror film techniques and different um, staples of the genre, right? So maybe that'd be interesting to discuss. So I wrote some notes, right? Um, one of the most well-known horror film techniques, it usually immediately puts people on edge, is called Dutch angles, right? And basically all that is a slightly canted perspective. Instead of filming horizontal to the plane where we're walking, things are just a little bit tilted off the horizontal. And it really puts a viewer at unease, right? Like it feels like the ceiling is falling in on you, or the walls are sliding closer, and you could just slide down the precipice into the unknown off the screen. I didn't know, but they apparently have a very long history, right? Uh, they started in like the 1920s in German expressionist films. Apparently, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1920 is perhaps the best known, right? Or perhaps the earliest known example of it. And this is a technique that really gained a lot of popularity in the horror genre. Horror films, once they moved away from just being black and white without sound, um, there were things like Alfred Hitchcock's films that relied on Dutch angles, or David Lynch films that often used Dutch angles to create that subtle dis-ease in the audience. That subtle unease, not dis-ease. Um, so yeah, that's a very common technique. And everybody, pretty much everybody knows what a Dutch angle is, but they might not know that they have such a long history. Personally, I think there are probably better techniques to discuss. More recent ones, more interesting ones that have widely proliferated in horror films that nobody thinks about, right? Like they just they just know they're there. And they just seem normal. They don't seem novel. They just seem like something that's always been a technique available to a horror film director. One of my favorite examples is something called shaky cam. Shaky cam is a relatively new thing, in fact. um, Sam Ramis, Sam Raimi's made The Evil Dead in 1981. The Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead, not the remake. The Evil Dead was a low-budget horror film starring Bruce Don't Call Me Ash Campbell. Bruce is a great actor. I really love his acting. Uh, Most people probably don't know much about Bruce other than The Evil Dead. He had a lot of weird roles in B movies. Um, and he might be best known for playing a character on Burn Notice, which was a television series, or for being the waiter in, I think it was the third uh, Maguire not Star Wars, Spider-Man film. Yeah, there we go. Which was also directed by Raimi. Yeah. But 1981's original Evil Dead pioneered a technique known as the shaky cam. It was a very simple technique. All they did was put a camera on a stick and moved it through the environment, the film set, as if it were a living creature, right? So a lot of filming before that relied on stabilization techniques and making sure that a frame was very stable. And the shaky cam, ooh, it was the exact opposite. Put it on a stick and wave it around. But I really like it. It gives the viewer a sense of movement, like they're seeing through the eyes of an unknown and unseen force, like they're the monster moving through the environment. It gives depth to a movie. It makes it more dynamic. And without the stabilization, of course it was shaky, but when you walk, you bob your head up and down. Your legs move at weird angles sometimes, and your own vision shakes. So not only is it giving it a more organic feeling, um, it's also controlling the framing of the camera, right? um, it's kind of like a controlled zoom, and a lot of stuff can be shown very quickly. So it feels like you're moving through massive distances or large environments that you might not get through a traditionally stabilized shot, simply because the stabilization doesn't give you the sense of scope, right? You don't know how quickly things are moving. You only have the one frame of reference. And that really is a nice dynamic technique, right? Yeah. But what I really wanted to talk about, and what really got me thinking about these kind of techniques, is I was thinking about how I took things for granted in horror films, right? Like, of course, I've taken Dutch angles for granted because they've been in movies since before I was born. And shaky cam too. Like, that's been in movies since before I was born. But I did live through one film technique um, that only happened after I was born, right? You probably know what I'm going to talk about, but I thought it was very interesting to think about because anyone born after me probably just sees this as another film gimmick. But in my life, I saw the creation of found footage style films. Um, Found footage style films being these basically home recorded videos turned into a movie, made popular in 1999 by the Blair Witch Project. I was alive to see that. I was alive to see that change. People now probably associate them with ultra low budget films, and I get that, right? It's very easy to make a found footage style film. You don't even have to have good actors because normal people aren't really actors. Although I think you probably should. Um, if you want to make a great found footage film, you have to have very strong actors that make unusual circumstances seem normal. Yeah. So I actually think you have to have better actors in a found footage style film than you would in other films to make things believable. Because other films have like higher budgets, they can use CGI or puppetry or some kind of practical effect to make monsters or whatever appear normal, right? They can make them seem like they're part of the film naturally. But with a found footage kind of thing, you really have to sell the acting. Yeah. But the premise is simple, right? Film from the perspective of a person actually filming during an event. That's wild to think about that other people hadn't thought of that, how to capitalize on that prior to the Blair Witch Project. But the Blair Witch Project was this huge phenomenon when it came out. People really were going wild over it. And I remember everybody telling me it's the scariest thing I've ever seen because it's so real. It feels real. The camera shows only the experience of a person supposedly there, which is very different from other traditional films, right? In other traditional films, you can go between different perspectives. You can, I guess, change the frame to show things that are outside of the actors' perspectives. So you can show things that the actors don't know. But with a found footage film, you can only show what the actors will be seeing. So it makes it feel very tense. We're seeing things through their eyes. The screen becomes their eyes. It makes us, the audience, feel like we're the ones experiencing the film. And this is, again, another one of those, I don't know. um, it's another sort of non-stabilized technique, I guess would be the way to describe it. And it's a way of playing with the framing, yeah. The perspective of it changes. I do think it's a natural outgrowth of the shaky cam, which showed us the perspective of an unknown force or entity, right? Again, shaky cam came out 1981, and found footage films just a little later in 1999. The found footage shows us the perspective of a prospective protagonist instead of the footage or the perspective of an unknown entity, right? So we go from antagonist to protagonist perspective, which is a nice shift. It makes it feel very real. And I think that's the major appeal of a lot of horror movies and shows that use the technique, right? And there were a lot of them, and there have been. In the early days, it was seen of as sort of a gimmick, a novelty. I remember that, right? But a lot of horror movies and shows have been filmed as found footage since 1999. It was very divisive as a technique, yeah. And it still kind of feels like it is. I remember in 2000, a show called Freaky Links came out. And Freaky Links is one of my favorite shows of the era. It got canceled very quickly. Thank you, Fox. But Freaky Links was a great show. It was about paranormal investigators, kind of. Like supernatural investigators, paranormal investigators, cryptid investigators before that was really a big thing, right? I think it was a show ahead of its time. It used a mix of found footage perspective and traditional filming and framing techniques. So they had stabilized cameras filming on sets, but they also used like the found footage style of the footage that these people were apparently recording for their own website, Freaky Links. And unfortunately, it got canceled after one season. It really was ahead of its time. I don't think people got it, right? Like, this was coming fresh off the back of the success of the Blair Witch Project, and it probably only got off the ground because the Blair Witch project got such publicity that found footage actually became viable, right? Unfortunately, I don't think people really got it. I don't think people were ready for it. Back then, cryptids and cryptozoology and the paranormal weren't as big as they are now, right? We didn't have ghost hunter television shows or Finding Bigfoot. This is a very niche kind of show, but I think it was very great. And I really do think the mixing of that kind of footage put a lot of people off, right? Like there are segments where it's traditional filming for a sitcom, and then interspersed between that, you'll find these little snippets of what the film crew for Freaky Links as actors, or the characters played by actors, were actually trying to film. So it was a bit off-putting, especially for the era. And yeah, I get it. Maybe that's a bit weird for people. I don't know. I've heard conflicting things about the show. I've heard that Fox just didn't like it, so they put it at weird time slots, and people just didn't watch in the weird time slots. It got canceled. Here's a fun fact. It's very hard to find that show anywhere, right? Like, episodes of that show are just in some weird limbo where, for the longest time, the best way to watch it was actually on YouTube at like 720p. And for some episodes, like, you can't even find them at 720p online. It's very hard. So if you ever want to watch Freaky Links, good luck to you. It's a very good show. I very much enjoyed every single episode they made. Yeah. If they ever made a sequel to that, that would be the only reason I'd ever watch a television show. um, After that, the next big found footage film that got any kind of cultural success was probably 2007's Paranormal Activity. Which is another thing that maybe some of my audience might not know about. In 2007, Paranormal Activity was announced, and they did a bunch of viral marketing, right? Like, a lot of the marketing was actually here on YouTube. Like, a lot of the trailers were just clips of the audience reacting like they were very scared. Some of them were very short, so you didn't really know what was going on. And it was just presented as this Blair Witch Project kind of found footage of a normal couple dealing with paranormal activity. I agree that the marketing came out and it made it look like one of the scariest films that would ever exist. It was so good, the marketing, that I actually went to see it when it came to the theater a couple of towns over from where I lived as a kid. I went with a couple of my friends, right? Because we all saw the viral marketing. We were all on YouTube. We were nerdy, I guess, for the time period. Now it just seems normal to be on YouTube. But back then, you kind of had to be, I guess, a little bit more hip to the culture, a little younger. So I went with a couple of my friends. We'd all seen the trailers. We all thought, this movie's gonna be great. Look at that. Everybody's scared in the audience. And I gotta say, I've never laughed so hard in a theater in my life. Like, I usually think that's very rude to laugh in a theater while you're watching a movie that other people have paid for. They've paid for the experience of watching, and you're just there laughing. And all of us were laughing. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just my friends. It was everyone in the theater. The laughter was infectious. Why did it scratch my face? Why didn't it scratch yours? For weeks, I'd be quoting that movie with my friends. And oh god, it was so good. It was unintentionally bad. I really loved it. The movie itself was not terrifying at all. It was not scary. It wasn't even believable. The claw marks were just these tiny little scratches. Oh, if you've never seen Paranormal Activity, it's worth it to watch just for the laugh. um, that said, the same year, another movie came out that I thought was a much better example of the found footage film style. It was George Romero's Diary of the Dead. Um, I think it was a much better found footage movie. I think, in a lot of ways, it didn't quite capture the true found footage vibe. It felt, it felt too stylized to be a group of friends, right? That was like the main appeal of the Blair Witch Project. It's a bunch of friends who don't know anything about filming, making a movie. With Diary of the Dead, it felt a little bit too professional to be a true found footage vibe. But I think the story actually explained that very well. The filming character was a film student. These were people who were studying film and film techniques. So the fact that there's proper framing and shots that you would find in a traditional film, a traditional horror film, it didn't feel too out of place. It could be explained away. And I think it did it. I think it did what it wanted to do fairly well, right? It was really a commentary on how people would rather film the apocalypse around them than actually lend a hand or work towards surviving together. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I feel like as a found footage film, um, it had all of the positives of the genre with pretty much none of the negatives, which would be like bad filming, unclear shots, things like that. You get all of the tension and the believability of it being a real event being filmed. I think the acting was pretty okay. Like, that's another strong point of the movie. I think the actors were pretty good at portraying their roles and making it seem like they were actual people experiencing events rather than just actors in a film. Yeah, and I really do like the message. The ultimate question of it. For whom are we filming our daily lives when we do that? When the world dies and humanity goes with it, who are these films for? These videos that we make? As a content creator, I have to ask myself that question a lot. Why do my videos exist? Why do they need to exist? And as far as zombie movies go, I think that's some of the best cultural commentary in a zombie movie since the original Dawn of the Dead. First, we're the consumers. We're the zombies eating everything around us. Then we're all pointless producers. It's kind of poetic in a way, right? To make that shift from consuming in a pointless manner to producing in a pointless manner, just for the sake of doing either. And I think Romero is probably one of the few people who actually commented on that shift in the culture. So yeah, a lot of people hated Diary of the Dead. But personally, I think it's probably my second favorite George Romero film of all time. Definitely the second favorite zombie one. Yeah. I really enjoy the movie, so if you've never seen it, and you like Dawn of the Dead, I would say give it a try. But I think that's where we're going to end it today. I know it's a bit of a shorter stream. um, but yeah, I had a fun time. I very much enjoyed that, and thank you all for coming. I love you all, but for now, hide out.